I think most of you have center clay, so I don't need to go through all the aspects. But again, cupping it, making a mushroom. If it's particularly stiff clay, which this one isn't, you can move it up and down, up and down. One time I remember Bill showing a student the difference between centering clay and not centering clay. He took a tool like this, threw the clay on here, and just made a mushroom, and then had the student try to throw with it. Well, obviously it wasn't centered all the way through. It wasn't going to work. You have to force the clay into that mushroom shape, into the centered state. Biggest problem that most potters have is not compressing the bottom of their pot. And it's not just making it flat across. That's not compressing it. You need to line up the clay platelets. If you get S cracks, that's usually because you did not compress the bottom of your pot. It's not only using your fingers and moving the clay from the center to the side and back. You can also use the sponge if that works better for you. Again, it's whatever ends up working better for you. Before I throw it up, I like to kind of compress that lip. The worst thing you can have is a skinny lip. Your foot needs to kind of almost be one-on-one with the foot pedal. And a lot of times when people will say, well, what wheel would work best for me? And I say, that's when you kind of need to get here, turn the wheel on, see how you feel about the foot pedal. This is the part that was magic. It just goes up. If at all possible, use the least amount of water as possible. Since you've had a little of the throwing slop in there, go ahead and use that. You don't want your fingers to stick on the ridges. So you do need some lubricant. Now that piece of paper over there is kind of what I'm going to show you and give you the memory. And again, throwing here, talking about Bill, talking about my daughters have brought a plethora of memories that if I get a little bit emotional, you'll understand why. This is called choking or necking. And you're basically just bringing the clay in from where it was. And it's going to get not level at the top. You simply cut that off with the needle tool. Now, Bill and I were salt potters. Salt firing is a single fire process. We would make our pots on the wheel. When they were totally dry, bone dry, we'd load them into the salt kiln. So how did we get glazes on there? We use what's called slips. Amico calls them engobes, the fancy French name for the same thing. Not to be confused with casting slip. A slip is like a glaze, but with enough clay in it so that it's going to stick and bond to the clay pot. So that if you took a pot that was fired traditionally, this fire, apply the glaze, and then fire it, break it apart, you will see a second skin of glaze. If you would break a salt pot or soda pot or just a single fired pot like Stephen Hill used to do, not see that second skin. The color of the slip had bonded with the clay, and you could hardly see a difference. Uh, so how did we create the color? I made all our slips. I would add like red iron oxide. In the reduction salt firing, it would go dark brown. Cobalt's going to be the same anywhere. It's going to go blue. And then chrome and cobalt would make it green, and so on and so on. If we would apply those slips to the pot right now on the wheel right now, it would deflocculate it. In other words, if I would go over there and talk about teapots for a while and come back in 5 minutes, flop on the ground. So what did we use? It would take a little time initially, but it saved on time in the long run because we would totally glaze our pot, totally finish it on the outside. Once the pot had set up for like a day, day and a half, it was usually my job. I'd pour the inside with a slip liner and then let the pot sit until it was totally dry. Then we load it to the kiln and fire it. The kiln firing from start to finish, from loading to firing to cooling down, took around 3 days. All right, so this is going to be a little noisy because I do need to blow it dry. Inside and always at an angle. That way it goes down the inside of the rim and filters out. It's almost like atmosphere in a kiln. One thing that Bill would always say to me, because he'd say, quit dinking with the pot. It's fine the way it is. I always wanted my pot to be so totally perfect. And you can't ever really make a perfectly round pot because, well, what Bill would end up saying, stop the wheel. Is anybody going to not know that it's not perfect? Whether it's here or fire. Well, no, I had to unfortunately agree with him. It didn't stop me still wanting to make a perfect pot. But it made sense. Okay, I am making this shape. It does kind of look like a honey pot shape, which we made a lot of honey pots. But after about 2 years of making pots, Bill called me into the main room. And, oh, by the way, our studio was the OTP gas station. I think most of you know that. One of Bill's, when he was teaching at KU, he loved having the adult students in his class. Helen Martin, who will be here today, was one of his students. Becky Johnson, who couldn't make it because she's babysitting kids, I don't know, Washington, Boston, someplace back east. Barbara McDonald was another one of his students, and it was her father-in-law that had built the teepee way back in 1929. He taught at Haskell. He was athletic director, football, basketball, all the coaches at the time. He coached the great, not Marvin, but Levi, the great Indian athlete, went to Haskell. But it had been vacant for 5 years. So when Bill retired from teaching, the McDonalds were really happy to have us in there. Their insurance went down. Plus, Barbara being a former student, she could get works into our salt kiln anytime she wanted. And Bill, growing up on a farm, he loved growing vegetables and stuff, and Clifford had his vegetable garden and grapes and all kind of stuff behind the teepee, behind where our kiln was. So Clifford was not much, on critter traps. And in this area, lots of gophers and moles and woodchucks, you name them, they're out here. Bill had all those traps because he grew up on a farm, so he would take his traps out and help Clifford save his garden from all the critters. So Clifford was cute. He nicknamed Bill the Great White Hunter. This is one of the things that had kind of eluded me because I hadn't done it in so long, and I'm still not back to the way I used to. I love this tool. It's a metal tool. It stays sharp. There's one for throwing counterclockwise like I do, and there's another one that's the reverse for lefties. So it's a great tool. It can get clay off in here so you have surface there, and it gets that excess clay off here. So that's getting better. I'm happy to see that. This is also one of my absolute favorite tools. Kemper WT6, I know it. It's code. I would use every part of this tool. This one for the 45-degree angle, which I'll use. This one for other pots where that real rounded edge there is great for putting an indentation just under the lip. And then if you're throwing straight vases, you got the long edge. Every part of that tool is great. Oh, another part of it I didn't think of. Again, with Bill and me doing slips, we would use the flexible rib to get our throwing marks off. It's not that we don't like throwing marks. Sometimes we had pots that we left the throwing marks, but because we were doing slips and then a lot of times doing sgraffitto work through the slips, we wanted the surface, the plain surface of the clay to be a blank slate for what we were going to do later. All right, WT6. Again, a nice undercut. That's so that the pot doesn't look like it's growing out of the table. Worst thing you can do is say, where was I supposed to start? Where am I supposed to end? Other part is this little thing for putting definition in. There, and you could even put one down here as another emphasis. I'm not going to do a whole lot with this because I have a reason for it to be there. This is just some of the clay from my throwing water yesterday that I put in the blender and then just added some red iron oxide to it. And usually we'd have several different kinds of slips that we would play around with. We would have a honey-colored slip that was made with rutile, and then we would have the blue slip and all of that. Today I'm just going to show you what happens with the red slip. I'll use Bill's favorite little tool. See, it kind of follows that line. Ah, got away from it. And the neat thing about doing this on the wheel is because then you can come back and kind of straighten your lip a little bit. And smooth it. Most of the time I didn't use a chamois for smoothing the lip, which definitely, if I were going to keep this pot, I would definitely use something. I always used thin plastic. You could dip it in water and it would fold over, and when you were through for the day, you threw the plastic away. A chamois would get tossed out with my throwing water. I'd never see it because it's the same color. All right, now the fun thing about this pot, I was talking about Bill calling me in one day. We were making pots, and he was doing something. I think he had finished a pot, set it aside, walked out to the main room, and started looking around, and he said, Ann, come out here. He had set a bunch of pots out on the table, and he said, what do you see? We were making teepee forms. The teepee had taken hold of us. All of our forms were going like this. Neither of us knew or figured it out until Bill started looking at the pots that were on the shelf. There was an aura. I mean, and it got to be tough to get away from those wide-base pots that form teepees. But it's kind of cool now to think back about it because, and that's why I kind of threw that, it's kind of a teepee shape. And if you see some of the pots that are over here, honey pot, teepee shape. Here's a pot that I made during that era, teepee shape. This is when I started getting away from it. I got a fascination with the amphora shape. So when we would come back from Christmas, and that was a time before Christmas, we'd make all the pots for galleries. We'd take a little break. A Bracker stamp. Like with his teapot, one day he threw nothing but these lids. He threw off the hump, and I would get in my, at the end of the day, a wear board full of nothing like these, but these, and covered over. So the next day I would come and make the bottom of the pot and decorate it and then find a lid that would fit it. When we did that together, then it just got stamped Bracker. After a while, though, in making vase forms and other things, it got to be where, who made that? Was it you or was it me? This is one pot that I put on the table because at this point in time, I really don't remember. I mean, it could be Bill Bracker or it could be an Aunt Bracker because our lips, our designs, our forms all started to be similar. Was I copying the master, the mentor, the teacher, the husband, or was he seeing something in my work that then he was emulating my forms? It really, at that point, didn't matter. And we felt it was important to sign our name was when we did something extra like trimming the bottom. Platters and bowls, there was an extra step involved because it needed a foot on the bottom. The other stuff, they just got our stamp, but it needed to be finished. So again, God gave us this wonderful thumb. Wet the thumb, go around and smooth that bottom because you want a smooth edge. You don't want anything that's going to scratch glass or a beautiful walnut table. If somebody bought a piece of pottery and the potter had not cleaned the rim and it was a mashed potato bowl and somebody pulled the mashed potato bowl over a walnut table and it made a scratch, is that person ever buying a piece of pottery again? I doubt it. So after doing that, invert a little bit because the worst thing is to have a rocking pot. Now, how do you turn this upside down? Well, over there you can see I found a jar. Let's see. You see where it says small wood tools? To the right of that is a plexiglass thing, and I have a pot I made a couple of days ago that is upside down in a bed of sponges to hold it upside down. On some of Bill's bigger ones, he would use 5-gallon buckets and turn pots upside down in with some, not sponges, but some of those things that come around furniture. He would always go, yeah. So basically, just take care of all the pots that way. Sgraffito work, here's one pot that I did some sgraffito work. And to find it, again, smoothing the bottom with your thumb, and indenting the bottom. This one can stand upside down. Used to make a lot of vases. Again, kind of a teepee form. Actually, friends, I kind of thought, looks kind of like a lady with a long dress. That's what I was, instead of the teepee, I was hoping that it kind of mirrored that. So that's how I finished.